Hi, my name is Pam Holland, and I am from the Department of Communication Disorders at Marshall University. I'm a speech language pathologist by trade and a feeding specialist. And today, this short webinar is created to provide moms, dads, and caregivers of infants and toddlers information about the development of feeding and swallowing, and some considerations for when your little one is ready to transition to solid foods. If you're watching this video, this means that you have a new baby. And so congratulations to you and your family. Most full-term babies come out ready to eat. So we're going to talk a little bit about this process today, and then talk about why your baby may be experiencing some challenges, what you can do to help your baby if that's the case, and why it's important to talk to your pediatrician. So the discussion points really are going, that we're going to cover today really focus on family and the importance of family within the feeding process. We're going to talk about the relationships during meals and how important that those relationships are, and the proximity in which you're eating with your infant and your toddler means to their development. We're really going to spend a little bit of time to ensure that everybody understands when your baby should be experiencing certain things with the feeding process. And we're going to talk about the timing of that. It's important to understand that timing does matter, that there's a window of opportunities when we should be introducing certain solid foods to our babies. And if we miss those opportunities, that is so very important that perhaps it could delay some of their development with regard to accepting solid foods. The last thing, and I hope one thing that you take away, is the importance of referrals. And if, as a mom or a dad or a caregiver, something just doesn't seem right with the feeding experience, talk to your pediatrician and they can help you get to the appropriate professional. So referrals are very important in this talk. So the first thing that we're wanting to talk about is what we should expect when we have a new baby. And so, as I said before, babies come out ready to eat. And so when we have an infant from 4 to 6 months of age, what we're going to see is they're ready to take the breast and the bottle. Later in that time frame, you may see them putting their hands to midline and holding on to that bottle, but they really are going to, at that point, need some significant support. In this chart, you're going to see development with regard to posture, because posture and tone and motor movements really go hand in hand with feeding. I often say what you see at the hips happens at the lips. So at birth, from birth to 4 to 6 months, babies are really going to need a little bit more support in their feeding. Once they begin to sit up around 6 to 9 months for a short period of times, this is also when you're going to see them putting their hands to their mouth, kind of self-stimulating with oral exploration with toys. You're going to see their interest in looking at objects, looking at food. They also may have fear of new people, so it's going to be important to have people that know that infant to feed them at that time. With regard to feeding, this is the perfect time to start introducing spoon feeding. Again, probably not till 6 months. This is when the baby's mouth actually grows a little bit more. And often, sometimes families will say, well, can I give them some solid foods, meaning baby foods, before 6 months? And one of the things that I like to tell families is that you have to remember what the tongue and the mouth is looking like in an infant. And so infants from birth to 4 to 6 months really have a tiny, tiny mouth, and their tongue can't move a whole lot. So you're going to see kind of a front and back movement with the tongue. When they transition to 6 to 9 months, their mouth gets a little bit bigger, and their tongue starts to move up and down. That's really the indicator of when it's time for them to be spoon feeding and taking some of those finger foods. And so it's important to remember structures and anatomy, as well as the physiology or the movement of the tongue. And those are the things that should really dictate when we introduce solid foods to our babies. And When we see our babies at 9 to 12 months, this is really when they're getting a little bit more independent. They could be crawling, they could be taking their first step, cruising when they're holding on to objects. They may even want to assist with spoon feeding. Don't be afraid to give your babies cups at this time. Little tiny open cups with your assistance they should be able to take. They should be eating lumpy foods and mashed foods. And you should be able to put them in a high chair, put out some Cheerios or some little soft foods that melt in their mouth, and they should be able to pick them up. One thing that I really want to focus in on is, 6 to 9, 9 to 12, when you start feeding your baby toddler foods and they're sitting in a high chair, really want to encourage you to support their feet. If you've ever sat at a bar stool and had your feet dangling, you always feel like a little unsteady. And this is what our babies do. When we transition from holding them and they feel very supported to putting in a high chair and having their feet dangle, it's real important for us to remember how that might make them feel. So just remember the support that our infants need at that time frame. 12 to 18 months, this is when we're seeing a lot more fine motor control. Self-feeding happens. They should be grasping with the food. They're going to probably spill some things, but don't be afraid to let them get messy. They should be holding a cup with 2 hands and holding and tipping their bottle. They should be pretty independent in that with some assistance. Once they hit 18 to 24 months, they have much more control. Their lips are usually closed. Self-feeding is the predominant mode of eating at that point. Again, toddlers 18 to 24 months should not be eating alone, but you should be able to sit next to them and they should be independently doing their own feeding. As I mentioned, this is really when you start seeing the up and down tongue movements, and their tongue movements are really becoming much more refined. You're going to see some chewing up and down. We call that munching. And it's really not until later in development, around 2, 2.5, 3, where we see the rotary jaw movement that we see infants do. So it's okay when you see that early munching. That's okay. That's part of the developmental process. So really when we see a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, we want to see that circular jaw movements. They can hold a cup with one hand. They can use fingers to fill the spoon. They should be helping you in the kitchen with all sorts of fun things. One of the other things I wanted to mention to you during this webinar is the importance of psychosocial milestones. They're so very important to the development of feeding. Infants and toddlers learn to interact with food based on their experiences with caregivers during meal times. Early on, they learn that when they cry because they feel hungry, moms and dads and caregivers respond by feeding them. And this really begins as early as 3 months. They begin to socially smile. We smile back at them. And so early positive experiences with feeding and social exchanges really sets the stage for positive feeding behaviors later. At 6 months, from a psychosocial standpoint, we can clearly see infants anticipating feedings. They move their arms and their legs, and they get really excited when they see the bottle or maybe mom preparing to breastfeed. They open their mouths when the spoon is coming and is approaching their mouth. And so they're really participating in the feeding process. And so it's really important for moms to remember this interaction and take advantage of that during the feeding process. It's about social exchanges. Think about us, what we do when we're meeting with our friends. It's generally around a meal. Where do you want to go to eat? What do you want to do? You want to grab some coffee. And so that feeding experience early on really sets the stage for the social reciprocity that really helps develop feeding too. And so these milestones that are listed here really talk about the aspect of our connection with our babies during feeding. One of the things that I like to talk about too is just what happens in the womb. And so these are some facts about fetuses as they're growing. Fetuses begin to swallow within the womb, 10 to 12 weeks gestation, and by 24 weeks in your belly, they're practicing swallowing. And so when you think about preterm infants that are born early, they don't have that opportunity to practice swallowing the amniotic fluid. So it's not uncommon that babies who are born premature have difficulty with that because they haven't had as much experience. And it is also important, if your baby was born before 30 weeks, that it's most likely that your infant's going to have some challenges with the suck, swallow, breathe process. Some healthy preterm babies can begin oral feeding as early as 32, 33 weeks gestation. One of the other facts that I think is important is that as many as 35% of infants exhibit food selectivity. We call those picky eaters or food refusals. Feeding problems are relatively common in some infants that are preterm, some that have congenital heart disease, open heart surgery. And so just keep in mind that if your baby started out a little earlier than we wanted them to, or they had some medical complications, that it's not uncommon for feeding to be a part of that process. As we move forward, and you may be thinking, yes, I have that picky eater. The only thing that you remember about this whole webinar is the 3 E's to eating. You're going to have the skill sets that are going to take you to the next step and to assist your baby or your toddler. And the 3 E's to eating are exposure, exploration, and expansion. And what I mean by that is that we want to expose our infants and toddlers to a variety of tastes and smells and textures and food experiences. So the more that you allow them to be exposed to those things, the better. So an example of that would be just feeding your infant or toddler at the same time you're eating, even if you're eating something different. The second E to eating is allowing them to explore. Let them get messy. Let them play. Let them, scoop things from your plate to another plate. Think about the family style in a big bowl and have them scoop the mashed potatoes on everyone's plate. Have them scoop the broccoli on everyone's plate, even if they don't want to eat it. Let them explore with it. All of those things, exposing them to a variety of foods and textures, allowing them to play and engage and participate in the meal prep without pressure to eat, eventually does lead to food expansion. So those are things you want to think about if you have a picky eater. These are some things if you have a toddler that maybe you just doesn't want to eat very well. There's a lot of ways that you can encourage them without saying, take a bite, 2 more bites, or 4 more bites, or 1 bite. Give them choices. Which do you want first? Do you want the banana or the grape? Then that gives them power. You haven't told them what they have to do. You've given them the choice. Do you want the big cheese or the little cheese? Do you want your smoothie in this cup or that cup? Again, choices give children power, and they don't feel the pressure that they may often feel when we're telling them that they have to eat something. And so also listed on that slide are some other things, playing with your food, like how wildly can you make this crunch? Sometimes kids will want to eat that even if they didn't want to, just to see if they can make it louder than you. And so be creative in some of the ways that we encourage our toddlers to try new foods. What's really important is to know when to ask for help. And so if you can remember these things, regardless of how old your baby is, how old your toddler is, even a preschooler, if your mealtime takes more than 30 minutes on average, that is a sign that you may want to talk to your pediatrician. Infants should finish a bottle, 20 minutes. Perhaps if you're breastfeeding and you're switching between one breast to another, it may take 30 minutes early on, but no meal should last more than 30 minutes. Are mealtimes stressful? Are they stressful for you? Are they stressful for the infant and toddler? If there's always a fight or there's always crying involved in the mealtime process, that's a concern, okay? We want experiences to be positive. If mealtimes are stressful initially, it develops the stage for having those experiences with food not be pleasurable as the toddler develops. Another thing that we want to consider is, does the infant or child show signs of respiratory distress? If your infant is having trouble breathing, you notice a difference in their breathing pattern during the eating, that's when you want to talk to your pediatrician. We will always choose breathing over eating. And so if you notice those signs, give your infant a break and talk to your pediatrician. Obviously, the indicator that you might want to talk to your pediatrician is weight gain. If your child has not gained weight in the past 2 to 3 months, it's time to maybe say something to your pediatrician. So those are some basic things that you want to consider if you have an infant that you may be concerned with. And so really, I just want to say congratulations again. If you have any questions about your baby's early feeding experiences as they transition to solid foods, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm located at Marshall University in the Department of Communication Disorders, and I'm the coordinator of the Pediatric Feeding and Swallowing Clinic here as well. So again, congratulations on your new baby or your toddler, and I hope you can integrate some of these strategies into your family mealtime routines. Thank you.